I'm Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. You're a useless failure who will never amount to anything, my father screamed, his face red with rage as he pointed toward the door. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. A disappointment of a daughter, she added with ice in her voice. I'd just told them I was 8 weeks pregnant. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. The living room of my childhood home suddenly felt like a courtroom where I'd already been found guilty. My hands trembled as I clutched my purse, still processing the cruelty in their words. I'd rehearsed this conversation for weeks, imagining different scenarios. None of them included being thrown out like garbage. Pack your things and get out, Dad continued, his voice getting louder. We didn't raise you to be some unwed mother bringing shame to this family. My younger brother Jake smirked from the couch, not even looking up from his phone. My sister Emma, only 16, stared at her hands in her lap. Nobody spoke up for me. Nobody asked if I needed help. Where exactly am I supposed to go? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. That's your problem now, Mom replied, turning her back to me. You made your choice. 20 minutes later, I stood on the porch with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag full of clothes. The February wind cut through my jacket like it had a personal grudge against me. My car, a 15-year-old Honda with over 200,000 miles, sat in the driveway looking as tired as I felt. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of my family through the living room window. They'd already moved on. Dad back in his recliner, Mom bustling around the kitchen, like I'd never existed at all. The baby inside me was barely the size of a grape, but already it was the only family I had left. I placed one hand on my still flat stomach and made a promise. We're going to be okay, little one. I don't know how, but we will. That night, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams, but it was mine for $48 a night. I had exactly $300 in my checking account and no plan beyond surviving until tomorrow. But as I lay on that scratchy bedspread, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was pregnancy hormones. Or maybe it was finally seeing my family's true colors. Either way, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. They'd thrown me away like I was nothing. Now I had to prove them wrong. The next morning I woke up with morning sickness and a plan. Well, the beginning of a plan anyway. I couldn't afford to stay at the motel much longer, and I needed a job that would hire someone immediately. Martha's Diner sat on Highway 9, one of those places where truckers and travelers stopped for coffee and pie. I'd driven past it 1,000 times, but never thought I'd be desperate enough to work there. The help wanted sign in the window looked like a lifeline. You ever waitressed before? Asked Martha, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked me up and down, taking in my wrinkled clothes and obvious desperation. No, ma'am, but I'm a fast learner and I need this job, I said honestly. Something in my voice must have convinced her. Tips and $6 an hour to start. You mess up orders or give me attitude, you're gone. Be here tomorrow at 5 a.m. The apartment I found was in the worst part of town, but it was mine for $400 a month. The previous tenant had left behind a mattress that I tried not to think too hard about, and the kitchen faucet only ran cold water. But it had a lock on the door and no family members telling me I was worthless. My first week at Martha's was rough. The coffee pot was heavier than it looked. My feet ached constantly, and some customers treated waitresses like they were invisible. But Martha turned out to be surprisingly kind, sliding extra food my way when she thought I wasn't looking. Eat up, honey, she'd say, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs. Growing a baby takes energy. I hadn't told her about the pregnancy, but Martha had raised 5 kids. She knew the signs. The regulars started to warm up to me, too. There was Frank, a retired mechanic who always ordered black coffee and apple pie. Betty, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for lunch and always left a $5 tip on a $6 meal. And Tom, a long-haul trucker who told the best stories about life on the road. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But late at night, in my tiny apartment, the reality would hit. I was 26, pregnant, and completely alone. My family hadn't called once to check if I was alive. Most days, I wasn't sure if that hurt or relieved me. I started buying a lottery ticket every Friday. Just one, with the same numbers, my birthday, my baby's due date, and the address of my childhood home. It was probably foolish, but for $2 a week, I could dream about a different life. A life where my baby and I would never have to worry about anything ever again. 6 weeks later, I'd settled into a routine that kept me sane. Up at 4:30, shower with whatever hot water the building's ancient heater could manage, then off to Martha's for the morning shift. The work was hard, but it was honest, and I was getting good at reading customers. The pregnancy was showing now, just a small bump that I could hide under loose shirts. I hadn't told anyone at work yet, but Martha kept making comments about me looking healthier and glowing. Must be all that fresh air from walking to work, I'd say, playing dumb, but I could see the knowing look in her eyes. Friday morning brought my usual routine. After my shift, I stopped at Quick Mart for groceries and my weekly lottery ticket. The clerk, a college kid named Derek, always joked about my retirement plan. "Same numbers again, Sarah?" he asked, printing out my ticket. "You know it," I replied, tucking the ticket into my wallet next to last week's loser. Consistency is key. That weekend, I finally decided to tell Martha about the baby. Monday morning, I pulled her aside during the lull between breakfast and lunch. "I need to tell you something," I started, my hands fidgeting with my apron strings. "You're pregnant," she said simply. "About 12 weeks along, if I had to guess." My mouth fell open. "How did you know?" She laughed, wiping down the counter with practiced efficiency. "Honey, I've been around pregnant women for 40 years. You've got that look, plus you've been turning green every time someone orders the bacon special. Are you going to fire me?" Martha's expression softened. "Why would I fire you? You're the best waitress I've had in years. But we need to talk about what happens when that baby comes." Relief washed over me so completely I almost started crying right there in the middle of the diner. "Thank you, Martha. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, sweetheart. Now, have you been taking vitamins? Because I've got some extras at home." This was what family was supposed to feel like, I realized. People who cared about your well-being without expecting anything in return. People who supported you when you needed it most. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, finally feeling optimistic about the future. I had a job, a place to live, and someone who cared about me and the baby. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. The lottery ticket from Friday sat on my kitchen table, forgotten until I remembered Saturday's drawing. I pulled up the numbers on my phone, more out of habit than hope. My fingers went numb as I checked the numbers once, twice, 3 times. I'd won. I stared at my phone screen until my eyes burned, certain I was hallucinating. The numbers on the lottery website matched the ones on my crumpled ticket perfectly. Every single one. First prize, $140 million. My hands shook so violently I dropped the phone. It clattered against the kitchen table, and I just sat there breathing like I'd run a marathon. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. But when I picked up the phone again, the numbers were still there, still matching. I called the lottery office 3 times before I found the courage to actually speak to someone. The woman on the phone was patient as I stumbled through my information, asking me to repeat my ticket numbers twice. "Congratulations, ma'am," she said. "You'll need to come to our main office in Denver to claim your prize. I'd suggest bringing a lawyer." A lawyer. I didn't even have a proper winter coat, and she was telling me to bring a lawyer. The next few days passed in a fog. I kept working my shifts at Martha's, partly because I needed the money to get to Denver, and partly because I was terrified this was all some cruel joke. But Martha noticed something was different. "You seem distracted lately," she said Wednesday morning, refilling the coffee pot. "Everything okay with the baby?" "The baby's fine," I said, and it was true. For the first time since I'd found out I was pregnant, everything was going to be fine. I drove to Denver that Friday in my beat-up Honda, praying it would make the 3-hour trip without breaking down. The lottery office was in a gleaming downtown building that made me feel underdressed in my thrift store clothes. The meeting itself was surreal. Papers to sign, photographs to take, decisions about lump sum versus payments. I chose the lump sum, even after taxes. $91 million, deposited into an account I'd opened that morning. "What will you do first?" asked the public relations woman, holding a massive cardboard check for the photos. I thought about my family, who'd thrown me out for being pregnant. I thought about my tiny apartment with no hot water. I thought about my baby, who would never know what it felt like to be unwanted. "Disappear," I said with a smile. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The first thing I bought was a reliable car. Not anything flashy. I wasn't ready for that kind of attention yet, but a used Toyota that would start every morning and had working heat. The salesman kept asking if I was sure I didn't want to look at something newer, but I wasn't ready to explain where my money had come from. Next was a real apartment. I found a furnished 2-bedroom in a quiet part of town, with actual hot water and a kitchen that didn't smell like cigarettes. The landlord wanted first month, last month, and a deposit. I paid 6 months upfront in cash, just because I could. Martha noticed when I gave my 2 weeks' notice. "You find something better?" she asked, genuinely concerned. "You could say that," I replied, unable to stop smiling. "But Martha, you saved my life these past few months. I want to do something for you." I slipped her an envelope with $10,000 cash inside. For all the free meals and kindness. She opened it, gasped, and immediately tried to hand it back. Sarah, I can't take this. Where did you even get this kind of money? I won the lottery, I said simply. And you were the only person who treated me like family when my real family threw me away. Martha hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, tears streaming down both our faces. You promised me you'll stay smart with that money, she whispered. I promise. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quietly setting up my new life. I met with financial advisors, opened investment accounts, and bought a modest house in a nice neighborhood across town. Nothing too extravagant, a 3-bedroom with a yard where my baby could play someday. I also started seeing a real doctor for prenatal care instead of relying on the free clinic. Dr. Rodriguez was kind and thorough, assuring me that both the baby and I were perfectly healthy. You seem much more relaxed than most first-time mothers, she observed during one appointment. I've had some recent good news, I said, one hand on my growing belly. Financial stress is off the table. But the best part was the silence. No phone calls demanding money for bills I didn't create. No guilt trips about family obligations. No one telling me I was worthless. I decorated the nursery in soft yellows and greens, not knowing if I was having a boy or girl, but wanting my baby to come home to something beautiful. As I hung tiny clothes in the closet, I imagined all the ways I'd make sure this child knew they were wanted and loved. My phone hadn't rung once since I'd moved. Not that I was surprised. My family had made their position clear. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they'd noticed I was gone. That question got answered sooner than I expected. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reading pregnancy books in my new living room. An unknown number, but the area code was familiar. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sarah, honey, is that you? My mother's voice was sweet as honey, a tone I hadn't heard since I was 12. Hello, Mom. Oh, thank goodness. We've been so worried. We went to that awful motel and they said you'd moved out weeks ago. Nobody knew where you'd gone. I almost laughed. Worried? Right. What do you want? Want? Sweetheart, we don't want anything. We just miss you terribly. Your father feels awful about that argument. You know how he gets when he's stressed about work. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly, I almost admired her technique. Almost. How did you get this number? Well, we hired someone to find you. A private investigator. We were that concerned. Her voice took on a wounded quality. Sarah, we need to talk. All of us. Can you come home for dinner Sunday? Through the window of my beautiful new house, I watched a neighbor walking her dog. Normal people, living normal lives, probably never having to question whether their parents actually loved them or just needed something. I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. Please, sweetheart, we're family. This is where you belong, and we want to help with the baby. We've been thinking maybe we were too harsh before. There it was. They knew about the baby, which meant they'd been watching me somehow. The investigator, probably. Help how? Well, you can move back home, save money. We'll help with childcare when you go back to work. It takes a village, you know. I could picture it perfectly. Me back in my childhood bedroom, dependent on them again, listening to subtle digs about my life choices while they played doting grandparents for their friends. That's generous, but I'm doing fine on my own. A pause. When Mom spoke again, her tone was sharper. Sarah, be realistic. You're a single mother working at a diner. You can't possibly be doing that fine. They didn't know. Somehow, despite hiring someone to find me, they didn't know about the lottery. This conversation suddenly became much more interesting. You're right, I said, letting a note of defeat creep into my voice. It has been hard. Of course it has, sweetheart. Come home Sunday. We'll figure everything out together. After I hung up, I sat in my designer living room, pregnant and worth $91 million, and started planning exactly how this family reunion was going to go. They wanted their daughter back? Fine. They were about to meet the new me. Sunday came faster than I expected, and I spent the morning carefully choosing my outfit. Not too nice. I didn't want to blow my cover yet, but not the thrift store clothes they'd last seen me in either. I settled on simple jeans and a maternity sweater that showed my bump clearly. Let them see what they'd thrown out. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal. I was making this trip in my reliable Toyota, pregnant and secretly wealthy, returning to the people who'd called me a worthless failure. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My heart hammered as I pulled into the familiar driveway. Dad's truck sat in the same spot it had occupied for 15 years. Mom's garden gnomes still lined the walkway, though someone had added new ones since I'd been gone. The house looked exactly the same, like a museum of my former life. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Mom stood there beaming, arms wide like she was greeting a beloved daughter returning from college instead of the pregnant woman she'd thrown out 3 months ago. Sarah! Oh, sweetheart, look at you. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like her familiar perfume and felt completely foreign. "You're glowing. Pregnancy suits you beautifully." The same woman who'd called me a disappointment now gushed over my appearance. I wondered if she practiced these performance pieces in the mirror. "Hi, Mom. Come in, come in. Everyone's here. We're having pot roast, your favorite." It wasn't my favorite. That was Jake's preference. But I didn't correct her. The living room looked unchanged except for one glaring addition: a baby swing still in its box, positioned prominently near Dad's chair. "Sarah!" Emma bounded over, genuine excitement lighting up her face. At 16, she was the only family member whose reaction felt authentic. "I've missed you so much. Are you okay? Where have you been living?" "I found a place across town," I said vaguely, hugging my sister back. She was the one person I genuinely missed. Dad emerged from the kitchen, his expression carefully neutral. Gone was the red-faced fury from our last encounter. Now he wore the mask of a concerned father. "Sarah, you look, well," he gestured toward the couch. "Sit down, please. You shouldn't be standing in your condition. My condition. 3 months ago, my pregnancy had been cause for banishment. Now it was something requiring delicate care." Jake lounged in his usual spot, game controller in hand, barely acknowledging my presence with a grunt. Some things never changed. "We ordered Chinese, too," Mom called from the kitchen. "I know how pregnancy cravings can be unpredictable. We want you to have options." The royal treatment continued through dinner. Dad carved the roast with ceremonial precision, Mom fussed over my plate size, and Emma peppered me with questions about the baby. Jake remained glued to his phone, occasionally looking up to smirk at something on his screen. "So," Dad said as Mom served apple pie, store-bought, not the homemade kind she made for special occasions, "we've been thinking about your situation." "Here it comes," I thought, taking a careful bite of pie. "Living alone while pregnant can't be easy," Mom continued, sliding seamlessly into the tag team approach they'd perfected over years of family discussions. "Financially or emotionally, we'd like you to move back home," Dad announced, as if he was bestowing a great honor. "Your room is exactly as you left it. We can convert Jake's old room into a nursery." "Hey!" Jake protested, looking up from his phone for the first time all evening. "You can move to the basement," Mom said dismissively. "It's time you had your own space anyway." I watched this family restructuring discussion with fascination. They were literally rearranging their home around my return, and none of them seemed to remember that they'd thrown me out in the first place. "That's very generous," I said carefully, "but I've got things figured out." "Sarah, be realistic." Dad's voice carried a note of familiar condescension. "You're working at a diner. That can't possibly pay enough to support yourself and a baby." "We're not trying to control your life," Mom added, though her tone suggested exactly the opposite. "We just want what's best for you and our grandchild." Our grandchild. Suddenly, this baby belonged to them, too. "Have you thought about what happens when the baby comes?" Dad pressed. "Childcare costs, medical bills, college savings. This is expensive stuff, Sarah." They painted a picture of financial disaster that would have terrified me 3 months ago. Now, sitting on $91 million, I found their concern almost comical. "We can help," Mom said softly. "Dad's been working overtime to build up savings for the baby. We want to be involved grandparents." The manipulation was masterful. Paint me as desperate, then swoop in as saviors. Make me grateful for their generosity while conveniently forgetting their previous cruelty. Emma squeezed my hand under the table. "I'd love having you here," she whispered, and I knew her offer was genuine. "Let me think about it," I said finally. "What do you think will happen next?" Drop your predictions in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed, because this family reunion is about to get very interesting. The week after the family dinner, my phone started ringing constantly. Mom called every morning to check on me. Dad left voicemails about practical considerations of raising a baby, and Emma texted hourly with decorating ideas for the potential nursery. Even Jake managed a grudging text asking if I needed help moving. The sudden attention felt overwhelming after months of complete silence. They'd gone from treating me like I didn't exist to acting like I was a fragile flower requiring constant care. The whiplash was nauseating. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading pregnancy books in my living room when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mom standing on my porch holding a casserole dish and wearing her most concerned expression. "Surprise!" she chirped when I opened the door. "I brought lunch. Thought you might be too tired to cook." Without waiting for an invitation, she brushed past me into my house. I watched her take in the spacious living room, the new furniture, the obvious signs that I was doing much better than they'd assumed. "This is nice," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Much nicer than I expected. How much is rent for a place like this?" "It's manageable," I replied, not offering details. She set the casserole on my kitchen counter, her eyes scanning every surface. You've got good taste in furniture. This couch looks expensive. I found some good deals. Mom opened my refrigerator under the pretense of storing leftovers, and I saw her expression shift as she took in the fully stocked shelves. Organic produce, premium brands, the kind of groceries that cost real money. Sarah, honey, how exactly are you affording all this? The house, the furniture, the food? Her voice carried a note of suspicion now. Diner wages can't possibly cover this lifestyle. I'd been waiting for this moment, the inevitable discovery that my circumstances had changed dramatically. I got a better job, I said simply. What kind of job? Administrative work. It pays well. The lie came easily, though I could see Mom's mind working, trying to reconcile my apparent prosperity with her assumptions about my capabilities. Administrative work, she repeated slowly. For what company? A small firm. You wouldn't know it. We stood in my kitchen, the tension thickening like humidity before a storm. Mom's concerned mother act was slipping, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. Where is this money coming from? Did someone give you a loan? Are you in some kind of trouble? The questions revealed what she really thought of me, that any success I might achieve had to come from outside help or illegal activity. The idea that I could simply improve my circumstances through my own efforts apparently never crossed her mind. Why is it so hard for you to believe I might be doing well on my own? That's not what I meant. She backtracked quickly. I just worry. You're young, and there are people who take advantage of pregnant women, predators who promise help but want something in return. She was projecting, I realized, describing her own family's behavior without recognizing it. My phone buzzed with a text from my financial advisor about a meeting to discuss investment strategies. Mom's eyes immediately locked onto the phone in my hand. Who was that? Work. On a Wednesday afternoon? Sometimes they need me to come in. Another lie, but necessary. I wasn't ready for the full revelation yet. That would come later, when I could control the narrative completely. Mom stayed for another hour, fishing for information with the subtlety of a detective interrogating a suspect. She asked about my job duties, my schedule, whether I was getting help from the baby's father. Every question designed to uncover my secret. I answered vaguely, enjoying the frustration that flashed across her face each time I deflected. For years, she'd known everything about my life because I'd shared it freely. Now I held information she desperately wanted, and the power dynamic felt intoxicating. Well, she said finally, gathering her purse with obvious reluctance. I should get going. Dad will want to hear about your new job. I'm sure he will. Sarah, you know we're here for you, right? Whatever you need, whatever's happening in your life, you can tell us. We're family. The word family hit differently now. I'd learned what family actually meant from Martha, who'd fed me without expecting anything in return, from Dr. Rodriguez, who cared about my baby's health, from my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who brought me homemade cookies just to be kind. These people who shared my DNA had only reappeared when they thought I needed something. Now that I clearly didn't need them, they wanted to know why. I'll keep that in mind, Mom. After she left, I sat in my beautiful living room, one hand on my growing belly, and smiled. They thought they were investigating me, but really, they were revealing themselves. Their sudden interest wasn't about love or concern. It was about control and curiosity. Soon enough, they'd get all the answers they were looking for, and they were going to hate every single one. The family ambush came 2 days later. I was enjoying a quiet Friday evening when my doorbell rang insistently. Through the window, I could see Dad's truck in my driveway alongside Mom's sedan. They'd decided to make a joint appearance. Dad stood on my porch looking stern and official, like he was there to deliver important news. Mom hovered behind him, clutching her purse like a shield. The concerned parent act had been replaced by something more aggressive. We need to talk, Dad announced the moment I opened the door, about these secrets you've been keeping. They pushed past me into my living room with the confidence of people who believed they had every right to answers. Dad positioned himself near the fireplace like he was conducting a board meeting, while Mom perched on the edge of my couch. Sarah, we know you're lying about something, Mom said without preamble. The job story doesn't add up. No administrative position pays enough for all this. She gestured around my living room like it was evidence of criminal activity. So we did some research, Dad continued. Called around to local businesses asking about administrative positions. Nobody's heard of hiring anyone matching your description. They'd been investigating me. My own parents had spent their week calling potential employers, trying to catch me in a lie. The violation felt intimate and infuriating. You've been checking up on me? We're concerned, Dad said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from childhood lectures. Young women in your position are vulnerable to all kinds of schemes. Drug money, prostitution, sugar daddies. We've seen it happen. The accusations hit like physical blows. In their minds, I was either a criminal or a victim. The possibility that I might have legitimately improved my circumstances apparently never occurred to them. "That's what you think of me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That I'm either selling drugs or selling myself? We don't know what to think," Mom replied, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You disappeared for months, then reappeared living like this. What are we supposed to believe? Maybe that your daughter is capable of taking care of herself," Dad scoffed. "Sarah, be realistic. 3 months ago, you were living in a motel, working at a diner, completely broke. Now you've got a house, new furniture, expensive food, designer clothes. That doesn't happen through honest work, not at your level. At my level. Like I was some lower form of life incapable of basic success. What do you want from me?" "The truth," Mom said firmly. "We can't help you if you won't tell us what's really going on, and we can't let you put our grandchild at risk." There it was, the threat I'd been waiting for. They were positioning themselves as the baby's protectors, implying that I was somehow dangerous to my own child. "At risk of what exactly?" "Whatever situation you've gotten yourself into," Dad said. "If you're involved with dangerous people, if you owe money to the wrong crowd, if you're dependent on someone who might turn violent, we need to know." The scenario they'd constructed was impressively detailed. In their narrative, I was a helpless victim caught up in something beyond my control, requiring their rescue and ongoing supervision. "And if I don't tell you what you want to hear?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look heavy with unspoken communication. "Then we'll have to consider other options," Dad said slowly. "Legal options. For the baby's safety." The threat was clear: comply with their demands or face a custody battle. They were so certain of my vulnerability that they believed they could intimidate me into submission. I stood up slowly, my hand resting on my belly, feeling more powerful than I'd ever felt in my life. "You want the truth? Fine. But you're not going to like it." I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a folder of documents I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Bank statements, investment portfolios, the lottery commission's official paperwork, evidence of wealth beyond their wildest imagination. "I won the lottery," I said simply, placing the folder on the coffee table between us. $140 million. After taxes, $91 million. The silence in the room was absolute. Dad's face went white. Mom's mouth fell open. They stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. This isn't possible," Mom whispered. "Check the dates," I said calmly. "I bought the winning ticket the Friday after you threw me out. Won the lottery exactly 1 week after you called me a worthless failure." Dad picked up the bank statement with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the numbers. $91 million, he read aloud, his voice barely audible. "So when you ask how I'm affording this house, this lifestyle, this independence, that's how. I don't need your help. I don't need your approval. And I sure as hell don't need your rescue." Mom started crying then, but they weren't tears of joy for my good fortune. They were tears of realization. They'd lost control of me completely, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to get it back. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that even I felt slightly dizzy. The aftermath of my revelation was immediate and predictable. Dad dropped the bank statements like they'd burned his fingers, while Mom's tears transformed from shock into something that looked suspiciously like panic. $91 million, Dad repeated, seeming to test whether the words made more sense the second time. They didn't. "You've been sitting on $91 million this whole time, while we worried ourselves sick about your welfare," Mom added, her voice taking on an accusatory edge. "While we lost sleep wondering if you were safe, if you had enough to eat, if you needed help." I almost laughed at the rewriting of history happening in real time. They'd worried themselves sick for exactly 0 days after throwing me out. But now my lottery win was somehow a betrayal of their non-existent concern. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom continued, her tears drying up with remarkable speed. "We're your family. We had a right to know." "A right?" I kept my voice level, though anger was building in my chest like pressure in a tea kettle. "The same right you exercised when you called me a worthless failure and threw me out of your house?" Dad's face flushed red. "That was different. We were shocked, emotional. People say things they don't mean when they're upset." "You meant every word." "No, we didn't," Mom said quickly. "We love you, Sarah. We've always loved you. Yes, we handled the pregnancy news badly, but we never stopped caring about you." The gaslighting was so smooth it was almost artistic. In their version of events, they were loving parents who'd made a single mistake, not people who'd abandoned their pregnant daughter without a backward glance. "Where were the phone calls?" I asked. "Where were the visits to check if I was okay? Where was any sign of this supposed love and concern?" "We thought you needed space," Dad said weakly. "For 3 months, We were giving you time to realize that family is important, Mom explained. We thought you'd come back when you were ready to be reasonable. Reasonable. Their code word for compliant. But you didn't come back. Dad continued, his voice hardening. You stayed away, living this secret life, lying to us about your circumstances. I didn't owe you explanations. You're our daughter, Mom exploded. Of course you owe us explanations. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. That doesn't just disappear because of one argument. And there it was, the family debt that could never be repaid. According to their logic, basic parental responsibility had created a lifetime obligation on my part. I won the lottery 1 week after you disowned me, I said quietly. 1 week. Do you understand what that means? They stared at me blankly. It means that when I needed you most, when I was scared and alone and pregnant, you weren't there. The universe provided for me instead. And now that you know I don't need you anymore, suddenly you want to be involved. That's not fair, Dad protested. We didn't know you were going to win the lottery. Exactly my point. You made your decision based on who you thought I was. A worthless failure who would never amount to anything. You were wrong. Mom's expression shifted, and I could see her calculating. The tears stopped completely, replaced by the focused attention she gave to solving problems. Sarah, we made mistakes. We admit that. But we're here now, and we want to make things right. How? Well, for starters, you shouldn't be living alone while pregnant. And you'll need help with the baby. Financial resources are wonderful, but you can't buy family support. I watched her pivot in real time, transforming from concerned parent to necessary service provider. She was repositioning herself as indispensable despite the obvious evidence to the contrary. I think I've been managing pretty well on my own. Have you? Dad interjected. Money doesn't solve everything, Sarah. You still need people who care about you. You still need guidance from people with more life experience. The condescension was breathtaking. Even with $91 million in the bank, I was still too young, too inexperienced, too fundamentally inadequate to manage my own life. What exactly are you proposing? Move back home, Mom said immediately. We'll help you invest wisely, make sure the money lasts, provide emotional support during your pregnancy. And in return? Another exchanged glance between them, loaded with meanings I was only beginning to understand. We're family, Dad said simply. We don't need anything in return except the chance to be part of your life again. The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting, but I played along, curious to see how far they'd take this performance. I'll consider it, I said. The relief on their faces was immediate and telling. They actually believed they could manipulate a multimillionaire as easily as they'd controlled their broke, desperate daughter. This was going to be more fun than I'd anticipated. The next 2 weeks revealed the true extent of my family's delusions. Now that they knew about the money, the subtle manipulation transformed into something much more aggressive. Phone calls came daily, each conversation peppered with increasingly obvious hints about their own financial struggles. Your father's truck needs major repairs, Mom mentioned during one call. The transmission is going out, and you know how expensive those are to fix. Emma's been looking at colleges, Dad added during another conversation. It's heartbreaking how much tuition costs these days. We want to help her, but our savings just aren't what they used to be. Even Jake, who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years, suddenly became chatty. I've been thinking about starting my own business, he announced during a surprise visit. Just need some startup capital. Nothing major. The requests weren't direct. They were too smart for that. Instead, they painted pictures of hardship and dropped hints about opportunities, waiting for me to volunteer assistance like the dutiful daughter they still believed I could become. But the real revelation came when I decided to test their intentions definitively. I called a family meeting for Saturday afternoon, claiming I had important news to share. They arrived at my house with an eagerness that was almost comical. Dad in his best shirt, Mom carrying homemade cookies, even Jake managing to shower and change clothes for the occasion. I've been thinking about what you said, I began once they'd settled in my living room, about family being important, about needing support during this time. Their faces lit up with identical expressions of satisfaction. Finally, the prodigal daughter was seeing reason. So I've made some decisions about the money. Mom leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. I'm setting up a trust fund for the baby's education. $5 million, managed by professional advisors. Untouchable until college age. Nods all around. This was sensible, responsible, exactly what they'd hoped to hear. I'm also donating $10 million to charity. The local women's shelter specifically. I want to help other women who've been thrown out by their families during crises. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dad's smile became forced, while Mom's expression shifted to something resembling panic. That's Very generous, Dad said carefully. But don't you think you should be more conservative with the money? Maybe start with smaller donations, see how it goes? I've also decided to buy Martha's diner, I continued, ignoring his suggestion. The woman who hired me when no one else would deserves to retire comfortably. I'm paying her $2 million for the business and giving her another $1 million as a thank you gift. Mom's face had gone completely white. She was watching me give away money at an alarming rate, money that she'd clearly been mentally spending on her own family's needs. Sarah, she said, her voice tight with poorly controlled desperation, these are lovely gestures, but you need to think about your own future and your child's future. This kind of spending is reckless. Is it? I'll still have over $70 million left. That might sound like a lot now, but money disappears faster than you think. You need to be practical. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the garden I'd been planning. You know what's interesting? When I was broke and pregnant, living in a motel, working at a diner for tips, none of you were concerned about my future. Now that I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, suddenly you're worried about my financial security. That's not fair, Jake protested. Jake, we didn't know how bad things were for you. You didn't want to know. Emma, who'd been unusually quiet throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Sarah, are you doing all this because you're mad at us? Because if you are, maybe we should talk about that instead of making irreversible financial decisions. I turned to look at my 16-year-old sister, the only person in the room whose concern felt genuine. I'm not making these decisions out of anger, Em. I'm making them because they're right. I'm giving money to people who helped me when I needed it, and to causes that matter to me. That's what people with resources should do. But what about us? The question came from Mom, and she asked it with such naked desperation that everyone in the room froze. Finally, the mask had slipped completely. What about you? We're your family. We raised you. We loved you before you had money, and we love you now. Don't we deserve some consideration? You loved me so much that you called me a worthless failure and threw me out when I needed you most. We made a mistake, Dad exploded. One mistake. Are you going to punish us forever? I'm not punishing anyone, I'm just not rewarding you. The silence that followed was deafening. 4 people sat in my living room, finally understanding that their plans to benefit from my good fortune had been completely unrealistic. So that's it? Mom asked quietly. You're just going to shut us out? I'm going to live my life according to my values. If you want a relationship with me and my child, you're welcome to try earning one, but it won't come with a paycheck. The meeting ended shortly after that, with my family filing out in stunned silence. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, I was sure. They weren't the type of people to accept defeat gracefully. But for tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. In my own home, carrying my child, answerable to no one but myself. The final showdown came exactly 12 hours later. I woke Sunday morning to the sound of multiple car doors slamming in my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I could see Dad's truck, Mom's sedan, and 2 additional cars I didn't recognize. The cavalry had arrived. I took my time getting dressed, choosing a comfortable maternity dress that showed my growing belly prominently. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted them to remember that they were not just attacking me, but their own grandchild. The doorbell rang with military precision as I was finishing my coffee. When I opened the door, I found not just my immediate family, but my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, Mom's sister and her husband who lived 2 hours away. They'd called in reinforcements. Sarah, Aunt Patricia greeted me with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. We need to have a serious conversation. They filed into my living room like an intervention team, arranging themselves strategically around the space. Dad and Uncle Robert flanked the fireplace. Mom and Aunt Patricia claimed the couch, while Jake and Emma positioned themselves near the door. I was literally surrounded. We've been talking, Dad began, his voice carrying a gravity I recognized from my childhood. About your recent behavior, your attitude toward family, and your concerning financial decisions. We're worried about your mental state, Mom added smoothly. Pregnancy hormones can cause erratic behavior, and sudden wealth can be overwhelming for someone without experience managing large sums of money. I almost admired the strategy. They were building a case for my incompetence, laying groundwork for whatever ultimatum they'd prepared. The donations, the extravagant spending, the hostility toward people who love you, Aunt Patricia continued. These aren't the actions of someone thinking clearly. We think you need help, Uncle Robert said bluntly. Professional help. Financial advisors who can protect you from making decisions you'll regret. And emotional support, Mom added quickly. From family members who have your best interests at heart. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one that faced the window overlooking my garden. What exactly are you proposing? Move back home, Dad said immediately. Let us help you manage this transition responsibly. We'll work with financial experts to set up proper investment strategies, create budgets, establish safeguards against impulsive spending. In exchange for what? The question hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Well, naturally, the family should benefit from this good fortune. We all contributed to raising you, supporting you, helping you become the person you are today. The person I am today is someone you called a worthless failure and threw out of your house. We've apologized for that, Aunt Patricia snapped. How long are you going to hold one moment of poor judgment against people who spent decades caring for you? It wasn't poor judgment. It was your true feelings, revealed under pressure. That's ridiculous, Mom protested. We were shocked, emotional, not thinking clearly. Anyone could have reacted badly to unexpected news. Martha didn't react badly when I told her I was pregnant. Dr. Rodriguez didn't throw me out of her office. Mrs. Patterson next door didn't call me a failure when she found out about the baby. Funny how it's only my family who couldn't handle the news with basic human decency. The comparisons hit home. I could see the discomfort on their faces as they realized how badly they compared to strangers who'd shown me kindness. But we're here now, Dad said desperately. We want to make things right. By controlling my money. By helping you manage it responsibly. Mom exploded. Sarah, you're 26 years old with no experience handling wealth. You're making emotional decisions that could bankrupt you within a few years. Like donating to charity? Like giving away millions on a whim, Uncle Robert interjected. That money could secure your family's future for generations. And you're throwing it away out of spite. I'm giving it to people and causes that matter to me. That's exactly what money is for. What about Emma's college tuition? Mom demanded. What about your parents' retirement? What about your nephew Jake's business opportunities? Don't we matter to you at all? And there it was. The guilt that had controlled me for 26 years. Repackaged and delivered with surgical precision. I was supposed to feel ashamed for not volunteering to solve everyone else's problems with my good fortune. Emma, who'd been silent through most of this ambush, finally spoke up. I don't want Sarah to pay for my college, she said quietly. I can get scholarships, take loans. I don't need her money. Need her. The adults in the room turned to stare at her like she'd spoken in tongues. Emma, don't be ridiculous, Mom scolded. Of course you want help with college. No, I don't. Not from someone who doesn't want to give it freely. That's not a gift. It's an obligation. My 16-year-old sister understood something the adults couldn't grasp. That forced generosity wasn't generosity at all. Emma's right, I said, standing up slowly. And that's exactly why none of you are getting a penny from me. The room erupted. Dad shouted about family obligations. Mom cried about ingratitude. Uncle Robert threatened legal action. And Aunt Patricia called me selfish and ungrateful. Only Emma and Jake remained quiet. Jake because he was texting, probably. And Emma because she was the only one with any sense. I think you should all leave now, I said when the noise finally died down. You're making a huge mistake, Dad warned. Family is all you really have in this world. Money won't love you back. No, but it won't throw me out when I'm pregnant and scared either. After they left, I sat in my peaceful living room, one hand on my belly, and thought about the family I was building. My child would never know what it felt like to be conditional love. They would never have to earn affection through compliance or fear losing support for making independent choices. 6 months later, I was walking through the park near my house when I ran into Emma. She was with a friend, both of them in their high school graduation robes, obviously celebrating. Sarah! Emma ran over and hugged me carefully, mindful of my very pregnant belly. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to pop, I laughed. Graduation was today? Yeah. And guess what? I got a full scholarship to state. Academic merit, not family connections. I beamed at her. Emma, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. Thanks. And Sarah? I need you to know what you did was right. Standing up to them, I mean. I've been watching how they treat people ever since that day at your house. And it's not good. They only care about what others can do for them. How are things at home? Tense. Mom and Dad are still angry about the money situation. They hired a lawyer to see if they could challenge your competency. But apparently being rich and pregnant doesn't make you legally incapable of managing your own affairs. We walked together for a while, talking about her college plans and my preparations for the baby. As we reached the park entrance, Emma turned to me with a serious expression. I know they're our family, but you don't owe them anything. You've built something good for yourself and your baby. Don't let them guilt you into destroying it. 3 weeks later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I named her Hope, because that's exactly what she represented. Hope for a better future, hope for unconditional love, hope for a family built on genuine care rather than obligation and manipulation. Martha was the first visitor at the hospital, bringing homemade cookies and tears of joy. Mrs. Patterson came next, carrying a hand-knitted blanket. Dr. Rodriguez stopped by after her shift, beaming with professional pride and personal affection. My birth family never called. As I held Hope in my arms that first night, watching her sleep peacefully in the nursery of our beautiful home, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost a family when I won the lottery. I'd gained the resources to find my real family, the people who celebrated my successes, supported my dreams, and loved me without conditions or expectations. The lottery ticket that changed everything hadn't just made me rich, it had made me free. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of people who chose themselves when no one else would. Sometimes the family we create is stronger than the family we're born into.